Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to the podcast and the YouTube channel, the XFL Week 6 picks, preview, DFS, betting we can talk, as well as I have the Vegas odds up over here. I will throw out the disclaimer that, we'll as I record this on a very early 4 a.m. East Coast time on Thursday, we'll see if these games actually are played. In the waking news that the NBA will be suspending their season, and we should have more news on that later today, probably by the time you're watching this, on the scheduling, and obviously the players in the league need to know what's going on, and being sure to take the proper and correct precautions with the coronavirus going around. So with that said, if you're somebody who tunes into my content often, we're going to continue to be doing the PGA and XFL content. We will see and kind of wait on what happens with the NBA schedule, if it's something that's going to be suspended for just 2 weeks, 2 to 4 weeks, or just until the playoffs start in mid-April. Then we'll be good to go. We'll kind of just cover team recaps, rookie recaps, all that stuff for each of those teams throughout the remainder of this month for the NBA content. But we'll see if it's something longer than that. Then we'll try to see if we want to supplement it with any NHL, if that's even around, and any of the niche sports. But XFL, PGA will continue. I will keep you updated on those things as well. Same for Patreon. But over here, we're going to be covering the NBA still. This is an XFL video, but just a little bit of a disclaimer for what's going on. So we'll go position by position like we usually do. If you're brand new here, welcome. My video today is sponsored by DraftKings.com. It's DFS snake draft, so online snake draft formats. You're similar to drafting in a season-long league for fantasy sports. That's what this is for your friends and family, except you just got to draft the players for that night or that week if it's the PGA. They have PGA contests right now. They have some other sports up there as well. Obviously, NHL and NBA will be right now. We'll see what happens with them and how long they're going to be a little bit delayed for the probably, I would assume, next 2 to 6 weeks with the playoffs starting, or at least scheduled to start in mid-April. Would not be shocked to see that delayed a little bit at this point, but you should check out drafters.com. They're going to have best ball for the NFL very soon, and if you want a 100% deposit match up to $50, so you just want to try it out, play $10 in PGA next week, you just want to try it out, play $10-20 in best ball leagues that are going to start coming out for the MLB as well as the NFL, then you could use the promo code SAL100 and you'll get just another $10 for free. You want to put 20 and you get another $20 for free. So let them know that you came from me. And then also I will call out that I do have Patreon exclusive content for the XFL. Friday, my rankings and tiers will be going up. Saturday morning will be my Closing Thoughts podcast discussing ownership, discussing trends, discussing potential leverage spots in tournaments on where we can eat some good chalk and jump off of some players. So if you're interested in any of that, that's all linked up down below. There's a lot of promotions. I would also urge you to sign up for these free strategy guides that are down below. They're totally free. Signing up, it's just an email opt-in, and there's 2 of them down there. I've had a lot of questions about just as DFS gets a little bit more competitive, especially in cash games, how to manage that. There's some strategies in those guides. So with that said, podcast people, thank you for sticking through that, as well as the YouTube folks. Let's get into this, starting with the quarterbacks. And man, oh man, it's a clear drop-off this week. I don't want any of the value quarterbacks. I just don't, or the quote-unquote value guys. Look, we played BJ Daniels last week. If you were a part of Patreon, you saw he was the tier 1 option with PJ Walker. They were the 2 top-tier quarterbacks, and then Josh Johnson was tier 2, first guy in. So those were the 3 top quarterbacks. They ended up being the 3 high-scoring guys. PJ Walker putting up high 20s, same for Josh Johnson going off in that high-scoring game to end the week with Tampa. Tampa been underrated team at this point, but BJ Daniels got us there. But if you go back and look at his game log, 2 rushing touchdowns, 1 yards that he got on turnovers. Other than that, he had 30 total rushing yards. He barely cracked 100 passing yards, and he did not do much else. I mean, we could have been very easily looking at BJ Daniels last week for 5-6 fantasy points, right? His 2 1-yard rushing touchdowns, 1.5 yards, were aided by turnovers that pretty much one of them stopped on the 1-yard line. Tackled on the 1-yard line. So he's not somebody I want to go back to at an increasing price point. He did not really show much chemistry with any receivers. And it's interesting. Cardale Jones gets pulled in his game last week very early after just 2 passes, both of 20-plus yards downfield, 1 of an interception. And they say that he's still going to be the starting quarterback. Seems like he has a very short leash. I don't want to play him at 8,800. I don't even want to play his backup Tyree Jackson, who came in and sure, he ran a little bit, but he also very much like BJ Daniels. And again, they might have not had a ton of practice with the first team, but did not look comfortable passing the ball. Phillips Nelson is now a part of a Dallas team that comes into this week with the lowest total on the slate at 15.75, lowest total by almost 5 full points. It's just not something I want to be a part of. We saw him absolutely tank the value of every single player out there. Donald Parham, both the running backs, not great. So the Dallas offense is something that's probably off the radar for me this week, not something I want to touch. Josh Johnson at 10,800, though, he's very appealing. He they have to keep him at this price point. Otherwise, you're just going to be pricing up all of your quarterbacks that are playable, and everybody's going to be forced to be playing the Philip Nelsons of the world. But yeah, I think that this is a fine spot for him today. He's going to go up against the worst rated coverage according to Pro Football Focus in Seattle. Seattle right now ranks 4th around average in overall pass rush as well. Josh Johnson finally showed a little bit of his mobility last week, maybe finally getting healthier, around a month removed from his injury that kept him out for the first few weeks of the season. Seattle allows the most total yards per game at 358 per game and the most passing yards at 248.8 per game. So you have Josh Johnson, who arguably is the hottest quarterback in the XFL. Obviously, PJ Walker has been the most consistent and high level, but if you're just talking about consistency through the last 4 weeks of the season, that's probably Josh Johnson for you, not scoring below 18 fantasy points yet in his 4 starts and averaging somewhere around the 23 fantasy point mark. So at 10,800, yeah, he looks like a really strong play with the matchup that you're getting from him. He has been leading the league in deep pass attempts over the last 3 weeks, even ahead of Philip Walker, so they're taking shots downfield. Trey McBride is now a limited participant in practice. So there's a lot of moving pieces for LA's offense right now. Jordan Smallwood, so all these are wide receivers. Jordan Smallwood did not practice with a hamstring as of Wednesday. Lots of time for this to change. Saeed Blackmon was limited with a thigh. Saeed Blackmon ran the most routes on this team, believe it or not. The last time out, pushed Jordan Smallwood into the slot more. Trey McBride and Nelson Spruce were both limited. McBride with a rib, Nelson Spruce with a knee injury. So pretty much all of his top 4 receivers are in some sort of injury spot, but 3 of them are limited. 1 early week DMP for Jordan Smallwood. Just keep a close eye on those. But yeah, Josh Johnson looks very favorable at this price point. Jordan Ta'amu is not usually a guy that I want to get to all that much. The matchup this week against Tampa Bay, though, Tampa Bay, these are the 2 fastest ranked teams in the league in terms of pace. Tampa Bay is number 1, Jordan Ta'amu is number 2. So what are you getting from him? Well, in a spot if they're going to run the ball 55-60% of the time, usually you'll get 24 pass attempts out of Jordan Ta'amu, or Ta'amu, however you would like to pronounce it. And it's a situation where, look, if now there's going to just be 10 more plays per team in this game and he's going to throw 30 times just on a pure pace of play standpoint, then yeah, I'm going to think that he's going to start looking a little bit better at this point. Tampa Bay right now ranks 6th out of 8 teams in coverage. They rank 2nd worst in overall defense. Situation where last week Jordan Ta'amu ranked number 2 only behind Luis Perez as overall passers. He attempted 25 passes, 60% completion percentage. Again, he did not do much with those passes, but he's just been very efficient and effective with his completion percentage, and that has been translating to touchdown percentages on the overall season. So $9,900 is a little bit steep, but it's one of the spots where I'm at least interested in considering him and getting to him in some lineups because of the fact that it's going to be the fastest paced game that we've seen so far in the XFL. And then Taylor Cornelius on the opposite side of that, he got to the 300-yard bonus in the last game. He was not terrible, I would say. Looked pretty solid. I mean, he ended up going for a 63% completion percentage, had the 2 interceptions with the 2 touchdowns. A sack as well in that game last week in the high-scoring game against LA, but he just has weapons. Like, this Tampa Bay team is loaded with weapons. Now Nick Truesdale was limited last week, only played about 50% of the snaps. He, as a full participant on Wednesday, should get up to 75%, 80% of the snaps moving forward. Just gives another weapon with Reese Horn, with Jalen Tolliver, with Dan Williams on the outside. So the quarterbacks that I want are the guys that actually have favorable spots, that actually seem that they'll be playing the whole game barring injury, and they have nice team totals. So give me PJ Walker. He has the highest total by 3.5 points at 26.75 against New York, 6.5 point favorites on the road. Give me Josh Johnson, who's on the road against Seattle, 2 point favorites at 23.5 implied total. St. Louis, in this order, Jordan Ta'amu, 3rd highest total at 22.75. And then you get Seattle with a decent total actually right now. And it's a 21.5 total, so it makes BJ Daniels somewhat more interesting at the $8,500 tag, but I'd rather have Taylor Cornelius and his passing upside as well as the mobility that he's shown, a couple of rushing touchdowns so far this year, did that a lot in college. So that's where we'll be at right now. These top 4 price guys probably shouldn't shock anybody, but that's where I currently am going to reside when it comes to my quarterbacks. Now, running backs are really interesting. So we have some injuries that we definitely need to be monitoring throughout the week when it comes to running backs. So for running backs right now, James Butler is limited with a foot. That's important. He went off last week just because he ended up scoring 2 touchdowns on limited touches, but his team was implied for 30, a touchdown more than anybody else. So if any week it was going to happen, it would be that one. D'Angelo Henderson has not played since the first quarter of week 1 for Houston as well. He was limited with the shoulder. Per usual, the St. Louis running backs, Matt Jones, did not practice with a knee. Leonard Tillery, their 3rd string running back, did not practice with an eye. But the big news to watch is Jaquise Patrick. He left early last week with a back injury. He has not practiced to start the week on Wednesday. De'Veon Smith, who's been dealing with a foot injury for about 2 weeks now, he was limited on Wednesday, so it's at least a good sign to start the week. And then in LA, all their guys, they were all banged up last week. Elijah Hood missed yet again. Martez Carter, Juwan Harris were both limited. Carter with a hip, Harris with an ankle injury. So right now, the biggest news to watch is really what happens with Jacques Patrick, Devion Smith. So I think it's a terrible week for running backs. And I usually have not been saying this because the Dallas backs have been providing us with a really good floor. But the way that Philip Nelson played last week and the fact that they used they used Austin Walter, they haven't used him since week 2, and he played like 1 or 2 snaps in week 2, but they used him on 10+% of the snaps. It cut in enough to guys like Dunbar, to Cameron Arden-Payne to impact their upside and their floors. So yeah, when Cameron Arden-Payne now is the second most expensive guy in the slate, and his team total is 15.75, and he's coming in as a 5-point underdog on the road right now at DC, and his quarterback can't seem to throw the ball. It's scary. Now, if Eric Dungey comes in the second quarter and looks half decent, well, then he should probably get the same offense that Landry Jones was able to operate, something that can move down the field and get into the red zone and actually provide upside for these price tags on these running backs who continued to run routes last week. Both Cameron Arden-Payne and Lance Dunbar were running 20-plus routes yet again, but it was just nowhere near as effective when the offense was not moving the ball downfield and sustaining drives. So I'm a little bit standoffish on Artis-Payne now at the top price point. Still okay to get to Dunbar, but even that's a little bit scary if Walter is going to be playing 10% of the snaps once again. Devion Smith would be the guy at $8,000 that stands out that, okay, I don't want to pay that type of a price point, but fast-paced offense. You're getting a matchup against St. Louis where so far this season, St. Louis has given up. They're only one of 3 teams to allow over 600 rushing yards. They allow 120 rushing yards per game so far, and it's a situation where it should be a close game. So neutral game script. He does run a lot of routes, and if Jacques Patrick is out, it's just really hard to not at least consider getting to him at that point. What you would end up having if Jacques Patrick missed would be Terrion Folston, who did actually play. He had 2 attempts for 5 yards last week. Really got that work when Patrick was out. Patrick had 7 carries for 23 yards and a touchdown before getting hurt. And then for back-to-back weeks, 24-plus touches for Devion Smith. He's just taking on a massive workload at this point. He would be the guy that I would want. Devion Smith had 9 more carries than anybody else in the XFL last week. James Butler is a guy who was really nice last week, but nothing changed about his role. He saw 12 carries, right? Not much going on in the receiving game for him. So it's a situation where I don't really know if I want to be chasing it, but he's once again on the highest scoring team and his price point doesn't come up all that much. What you get out of James Butler last week was he only ran 6 routes. So this is the thing that's concerning. Like his price point is $6,900. He had 12 carries. He's been seeing like 8 to 10 a week, 8 to 12 a week. He had 3 receptions for 17 yards, which is fantastic, but he only ran 6 routes. He literally had a target and a reception on 50% of his routes run. That is unheard of. So that's not going to continue. They're continuing not to use running backs in the backfield. They had no back sets for about 20% of their plays last week and 25% of their plays in week 4. So he's in play because of the fact that running back is very sketchy this week in general. It's an okay spot in terms of him being a 6.5-point favorite. I'm going to project him for 1 reception. I'm going to project him for 10 carries. That's not great at this price point, but it's just kind of similar to everything else in this range. Jarrell Presley came back last week, and he impressed in a big way. He was number 2 in the league, tied with Darius Victor, who's next on this list, for most carries. He had 15 carries last week. He was actually a favorite target of Tyree Jackson when he came into the game. They were sort of just forced to run the ball a lot more. They ran the ball 29 times with just Pumphrey and Presley alone, after Presley only played 3 snaps total, 3% of the snaps the week before. So Presley at 6,100, but was encouraging was that he split the workload with Pumphrey, which was not the case the weeks before that. He was pretty much getting phased out for some of the backups. Abdullah was not active for this game, so it allowed them to only have 3 running backs active, which probably gave Presley a little bit more of a chance to actually get a little bit more work in. But he only ran 7 routes. It's very similar to what you got out of James Butler. Butler had 3 catches on 3 targets on 6 routes. Presley had 3 catches on 4 targets on 7 routes run. That's just not going to continue, so he ends up picking up 4.5 more fantasy points in the air. He obviously made his payday on the ground where he went for over 100 yards on 15 carries. And it's just not a situation. He had a long of 27. It's not a situation where I think is repeatable, but yet again, at this price tag, every other running back on the slate is pretty much in the mid 5s to the mid to upper 6K range, and they're all kind of slated to get 12 carries or so. Like Butler should see around 12 carries, total touches. Presley should see around 12 total touches. Pumphrey, the next guy in this list, who is still labeled as a starter for DC, was out-touched by 1 carry by Presley last week. But the interesting thing was that Pumphrey didn't run a route last week. Presley ran 7 routes. No other running back ran a route last week. And that's surprising, at least to me, from what we were getting Pumphrey as one of the top 5 usage running backs in terms of his role in the passing game. He was number 2 behind Lance Dunbar in the slot. So a little bit standoffish on both these DC backs. You get the huge price boost for Pumphrey, but he's in a 50-50, or Presley, but he's in a 50-50 backfield split with Pumphrey now. and they both got the price bump up. Darius Victor also had 15 carries last week. He continues to just be the workhorse in this backfield. My concerns would be that Darius Victor, a couple things. One, he's a 6-point underdog against Houston, so how much are they actually going to be willing to run? They've been just very willing to run, though, not really changing that format for themselves. You had Darius Victor actually running 19 routes last week, which is encouraging. That's a lot of routes for a running back in this league. Anything above like 14 is a high for a running back in the week. He had 1 reception for no yards on that. But then what you got from him was 14 carries on the ground, 15 carries on the ground for 58 yards. So nothing strong there. The receiving game is not elite, but you're pretty much paying $5,700 for a very similar role for Darius Victor, if not a better role than you're going to get out of Presley, out of Pumphrey. Like, those guys are not going to split 30 plus carries each and every week. They'll probably split more so around like 24 carries, 12 carries apiece. And Victor right now has a control of like 2/3 of the backfield touches and snaps. So I think Victor edges out those DC backs a little bit for me. And then Christine Michael at this point, keep an eye on Matt Jones like you do every single week. Christine Michael had 12 carries for 69 yards last week. He actually ended up catching a pass as well. It made him one of the more valuable running backs on the slate, believe it or not. That's just how much of a crapshoot this running back position is. Like, he only ran 6 routes. Matt Jones ran 10 routes. Running back had 1 reception for no yards. Keith Ford had a target on 6 routes. And Christine Michael ran 6 routes and just ended up getting a catch for 14 yards. That extra 2.4 fantasy points gets him from scoring only 6.7 fantasy points to over 9 fantasy points. And in the XFL, that's a lot for a running back. So 5,300, he's going to be on the field. He's going to be in a situation where the amount of plays in this Tampa Bay game, he should see anywhere from, I'm going to project him for 0.5 receptions based on the fact that he has 4 receptions in 5 games, so a half a reception, but then I'm projecting for 12 carries. So you're getting 12 carries out of Michael for 5,300. You're probably getting somewhere around 12 for Pumphrey and Presley, and then you're banking on receiving game roles at that point. I'd rather just take the cheaper guy. So I think De'Veon Smith looks really good this week. I think if you want to take the risks on the Dallas guys again, you can, but man, that offense looked bad and their team total is not that encouraging. Running back is a crapshoot this week. If Jacques Patrick was to miss, you can get Folston as the backup in Tampa Bay to probably play at least a quarter to a third to maybe even 40% of the snaps and take on that Patrick role, which would look pretty good for you at that point. He'll be really cheap. Other than that, De'Veon Smith would take on a great workload of probably 20 touches or around there, barring injury against St. Louis. So, crapshoot at running back this week. As I move into the wide receiver page, please do hit that video with a like. Please hit the video with a subscribe button. And if you're listening on the audio version, hit the subscribe button. I'll be pulling out NBA content. We'll get more news on that today, like I said at the top of the show. But I'll be doing more NBA content here on YouTube and on the Patreon podcast as well, a couple times a week, discussing some of the more nuanced and macro level things for the NBA this year. Look at where teams have been and players throughout this current season, what the outlooks are them for not just the end of the season, but the future of some contracts. Rookies, examine rookies. I personally think Kobe White is like the number 3 rookie in the league right now, at least from a DFS perspective in fantasy, but factoring in defense, things like that, maybe you start to get to RJ Barrett factoring in just drives and actually scoring, but man, Kobe White looks good. But other than that, you can check all that out on Patreon. It's linked up down below. And also, just hitting the subscribe button, notification bell, you get entered into a $25 weekly giveaway on either the podcast platform or over here on YouTube. And give me any feedback you would like on this XFL slate. So getting into wide receiver, I actually was able to filter this wide receiver slate down a lot more than I usually am. I only have 15 receivers here. If you've tuned into some of these other videos, usually it's around like the 20 receiver mark. So some injuries, but we'll talk through the injuries to start here. But really, it's just because of like we talked about in the quarterback play, some quarterbacks that just have no consistency. Philip Nelson does not give me any excitement to play Dallas guys. BJ Daniels does not give me any excitement to play Seattle guys. Same thing can be said for Luis Perez to an extent in New York. Same thing can be said for whatever happens in the DC, even though they have a lot of talented receivers, Eli Rogers, DeAndre Tompkins, Rashad Ross. It's concerning that Tyrell Jones looks terrible and Tyree Jackson did not look like he could throw the ball more than 10 yards downfield. So what you end up having right now after Wednesday practice reports, Cam Phillips did not practice with a knee. That's kind of been the status quo. He's been missing 1 or 2 practices a week, so keep an eye on that. Sammy Coates, who missed last week for Houston, was limited with a hamstring injury. We saw 100% of the snaps played by Sam Mobley. Even if Sammy Coates comes back, I think he will firmly remain behind Sam Mobley. That's what was happening in weeks 3 and weeks 4 before the injury. Sam Mobley was playing like 55% of the snaps, 57% of the snaps ahead of Sammy Coates. I think Mobley, even if Coates returns, locks himself into a 60 plus, maybe 70 plus % of the role snaps after playing really good last week. More wide receiver injuries / tight ends. Nick Truesdale practiced in full for Tampa Bay. St. Louis, no injury reports for their wide receivers right now. Armani Edwards in Dallas did not practice with a hip. He really has not been doing much this year. They acquired him midseason. And then the wide receivers that we talked about for LA when we talked about Josh Johnson, Jordan Small with DNP, did not practice with a hamstring. He actually played more of his routes out of the slot in week 5 as Saeed Blacknall secured an outside receiver role opposite Trey McBride. Saeed Blackman remains limited with a thigh that kept him out for a few weeks. Trey McBride limited with a rib, and then you have Nelson Spruce limited with a knee. He was upgraded to limited after missing, so keep a close eye on Nelson Spruce. He's still priced up a lot, but if he returns, this offense is going to be absolutely deadly. And finally, in Seattle, Keenan Reynolds did not practice with an ankle. That's something to pay attention to because you have no Brandon Silver still. He has not been practicing. It's probably going to be BJ Daniels regardless. But Kason Williams is limited with a quad. He missed the first 5 weeks. He was labeled as the starting wide receiver to start the season. And Kason Williams is going to come in at a very favorable price point of $3,800. If Kason Williams was to play, and then the perfect recipe of Keenan Reynolds was to miss with an ankle, you have a $3,800 receiver who's probably scheduled to be the number one receiver on this team. Yes, the quarterback play is not great, but he's $3,800, and you're really not going to find that much better value on the week. So starting it off with Cam Phillips at the top, I don't have to tell you guys much about Cam Phillips at this point. Right? It's a unbelievable thing of what this guy's doing. Added another 10 receptions for 122 yards and 2 touchdowns on 13 targets last week. He had 3.05 yards per route run. If we're talking about anybody who was above 6 targets, that was number 3 in the league. Anybody above 8 targets, that was easily number 1 in the league. Or 8 targets or more, that was number 1. There's only like 5 guys who secured 8 targets last week, but yeah, he's been absolutely unreal. If you want to keep playing him, go ahead. Nelson Spruce, track his status against Seattle. Again, Seattle gives up the most passing yards in the league. I think Josh Johnson's price point is pretty favorable for us right now, so I want to get pieces of his receivers. His receivers are expensive, though. Nelson Spruce, Trey McBride, both limited right now. I would still prefer Trey McBride on the outside. The way that I see this going is if, say, everybody's healthy, Jordan Smallwood starts practicing, all these guys who are limited for LA play, I would think that it's Trey McBride on the outside. I would think that it's Nelson Spruce in the slot. And then you start to see a split of Saeed Blacknell and Jordan Smallwood on the outside. And if last week was to indicate anything for us, I think that it would probably mean that Saeed Blacknell, week 1, he led this team in routes run. Last week, he led this team in routes run with 35, 1 ahead of Jordan Smallwood, who moved into the slot for about 80% of his routes. So I think you would start to see a full-time role for Nelson Spruce in the slot, a full-time role for Trey McBride remaining on the outside where he ran 30 routes last week. And then I think that you would see a split for Saeed Blacknell and Smallwood on the left hash mark on the outside. So that's a little bit concerning. I think I would prefer Trey McBride over all of them right now, but we'll see what the injury news yields out. Dan Williams versus St. Louis. St. Louis is actually a pretty strong defense when it comes to coverage. Right now, they rank number 2, only behind Houston. So at 8,700, it makes Dan Williams not as appealing, but they're going to run so many plays. Each team should probably run around 80 plays in this game. It's going to be insane. They're both averaging like close to the mid to upper 70s. Last 3 out of the 4 weeks, Tampa Bay's ran 80 plus plays. So $8,700 is definitely in play for GPPs for Williams, maybe not so much cash. Flynn Nagel is maybe the most secure thing if Phil Nelson's starting, but even then, he's a high price point of $7,500. You're probably securing you're getting a ton of production in terms of opportunity. So Flynn Nagel, once again last week, as he did the week before, led the league in routes run with 45. He secured 9 targets. 9 targets last week would rank 3rd with a couple other guys, Donald Parham on his own team. He secured 7 receptions for 46 yards. That's what you're going to get. With Philip Nelson in there at quarterback, you're going to get short, quick passes. Week 1, he targeted Parham and Nagel at the same clip and Dunbar 6 times. Then you saw him really favoring Parham with 9 targets and Flynn Nagel with 9. Parham's downfield targets were just not completed. He only saw 4 receptions on his 9 targets. Nagel's were much shorter, 7 receptions on his 9 targets. You're not going to get much after the catch from Nagel. You're hoping for that quantity over quality type of target share. So, look, he's 7,500. Even if you got what you got last week, he scored 12 fantasy points. That's not terrible, but it took every bit of his targets to get him there in terms of catching 7 to 9 of them. Yes, if he scores a touchdown, he's fine here. They're going to be playing from behind, but that 15 implied team total is making me really scared. Jalen Tolliver's price point comes up. Had 95 yards and a touchdown in that game that went just wildly. It had like 40 something fantasy points at the half, or real points at the half. It hit the over at half last week, LA and Tampa. I think Tolliver's still fantastic. Look, it's really hard not to like a guy who's currently right now number 3 in the XFL in routes run with 185. Comes in with 35 targets at this point in the XFL. That ranks number 5. And then when you rank him by receptions right now, he's up there as well in the top 10. So a guy that I like a lot is Jalen Tolliver. Now the price point comes up to $7K, but it looks like there's more upside on the outside. Tougher matchup versus St. Louis, but I would prefer him to Flynn Nagel. When you compare him to his teammate Dan Williams should probably see more targets overall, but $1,700 less. I think that it's kind of a coin flip at that point. Jordan Smallwood did not practice Wednesday, $6,900. Keep a close eye on this. I will not have interest in Jordan Smallwood if Nelson Spruce plays. Even if Jordan Smallwood plays, it's going to be Trey McBride and Nelson Spruce playing a lot of snaps, and then Saeed Blacknell probably edging out Jordan Smallwood on the outside. If at most they're going to be splitting snaps, and that's not what I want to pay $6,900 for. LDamian Washington went off last week at 100 plus yards. That's not always going to be the case, but this week, like we said, there's going to be a ton of plays in this game. So at 6,800, I'm okay getting to the guy in St. Louis who, so far, if we're just looking at it from a season standpoint, is leading his team in routes run and opportunity by a wide margin. 19 more routes run than anybody else on the team. He has 2 more targets than Pearson L, but he also has 55 more routes run than Pearson L. And then after that, he's got 11 more targets than Alonzo Russell, who's the wide receiver 3. He's got 5 more targets than Marcus Lucas, who's a tight end / wide receiver hybrid. So he's just the number one wide receiver, in my opinion, in this offense. On a per target basis, it's Pearson L, 2.25 yards per route run. But in terms of just consistency, it's going to be LDamian Washington. McCall McKay's price point goes down to $6,500. He's been coming on as of late. Luis Perez actually started taking some deep shots last week, which was good to see. You ended up getting from McCall McKay last week, he ended up seeing 9 total targets. One of them was a deep shot. It was completed for 45 yards downfield. So it was just really nice to see the 9 targets. I'm looking at the entire season standpoint in terms of his deep shots. He saw 7 targets last week, and 2 of them were deep shots downfield. So it was just nice to see some sort of pushing the ball downfield. He's an elite player who's just too cheap price. Yes, the team total sucks, but if you're going to take shots on these New York guys, $6,300 for Pearson, I prefer McKay. Pearson's 80-yard touchdown was pretty nice. Nice broken tackle and then a long run after the catch. But I'm not going to bank on that every single week. I'm just going to bank on the fact that these guys should probably be in line for Pearson had 6 targets last week, McKay 7. I'd be shocked if they don't see 6 targets apiece as such big underdogs this week coming in against Houston. So McKay's in play for me more than Pearson, but I like them both. Reese Horn, with Nick Truesdale being healthier and healthier, he only played around 50% of the snaps last week. He'll probably get up to around 75% once he's fully healthy. Could be as soon as this week. That's going to eventually impact Reese Horn. But what you saw to Reese Horn last week was some encouraging things. You saw Reese Horn and this team in general. Horn ends up going for the 9th most routes run with 37. He ends up seeing 11 targets, 2nd most on the week, 9 catches, 90 yards, and a touchdown. He's a slot receiver who has this role very much on lock, playing pretty much all the snaps out of the slot at this point when they go through wide receiver sets. No other wide receivers are really getting into the rotation all that much. It's a very firm 3 wide receiver set. And he's still wildly affordable. I do have concerns with Nick Truesdale coming back, but I have interest. Sam Mobley at $5,500. If Sammy Coates is out, fire him up again against New York. Played 100% of the snaps, looks damn good, was a deep threat for them, and an intermediate route runner, and he was very crisp at doing that. He had 40 routes run, which ranked 4th in the league last week, 9 targets, which ranked 4th. Or 3rd, and 6 catches, 95 yards. He looked very good, just missed a 100-yard bonus. He was one of our top options with, last week, he was one of our top options with Cam Phillips, which, shocker, and Jalen Tolliver. I think that, once again, he's a great play. Even if Sammy Coates plays, I have interest. Nick Truesdale at $4,600. This is the thoughts that he only played 50% of the snaps last week. He's going to slowly increase, if not very quickly, increase another 25% of his snaps in the next week or 2 weeks. $4,600 for the number 1 overall pick there, the tight end in Tampa Bay in this fast-paced game. Hard to ignore at a cheaper price point where you're going to need to find value somewhere this week. The cheap running backs look pretty terrible. The cheap quarterbacks look really bad. And overall, the cheap wide receivers below $6K, there's not many, with DraftKings becoming a lot more efficient with the salaries. Saeed Blacknall led the entire team last week in routes run. It was pretty crazy. Blacknall had 35 routes run, led all the LA receivers. Now, Trey McBride, Jordan Smallwood did get nicked up during those games, so still he was up there, and he ran 1 more route than Smallwood, 5 more routes run than Trey McBride on his own team. He led the team week 1 as well. He was then hurt week 2. He was in like a healthy scratch week 3. Week 4, he played only 30% of the snaps behind Smallwood and scored a deep touchdown. And then last week, he played most of the snaps, and he ended up scoring another deep touchdown. So I don't know how often he's going to continue to score these 40-plus yard touchdowns like he has the last 2 weeks. Shout out to Saeed Blacknall. Went to Penn State, same age as him. Hung out in my apartment a few times, but I wish him the best. I hope he continues to do this. And I do think that he will remain the outside receiver ahead of Jordan Smallwood, but there might be a split. I'd rather play Blacknall at $4,500, though, than Smallwood at $6,900 if that's the case. And then finally, the 15th wide receiver on this list is Kason Williams. Again, he's a Seattle guy, and BJ Daniels did not look good, but another week of practice. Kason Williams is finally limited. He has missed the first 5 weeks of the season. Keep an eye on Keenan Reynolds' status. He did not practice. So if you were to get the perfect storm of Kason Williams returning on a no-snap limit and Keenan Reynolds out, my projection would be that Kason Williams on the outside with Alonzo Moore on the outside, and then Perrell in the slot would be the starting wide receivers, and Williams should then play the far majority of the snaps in a game that should feature a good amount of passes. Seattle has a decent implied team total, a top 4 team total on the slate, which is actually more than I thought it would be. So I think at $3,800, he looks like one of the better values right now if he was to suit up and there was to be no Keenan Reynolds. So keep an eye on that. So that's where I'm at right now with the week 6. There will be rankings for GPPs and cash, as well as cash game tiers to kind of separate the rankings to give you even more in-depth look at it tomorrow on Patreon, as well as Saturday morning, a Patreon exclusive podcast. And Saturday, I will be live just taking questions, discussing the XFL, anything else, the NBA fallout right now, and all that if you guys want, over on YouTube on Saturday live, probably around 10. So with that, I appreciate everybody tuning in. Thank you so much. Be sure to hit the subscribe button before you go. Get entered into the $25 giveaway. Check out Patreon. Check out the free strategy guides linked down below. I would urge you to definitely check those out and read those. A lot of good information in them. And check out drafters.com. 100% deposit match up to $50 if you use the promo code SAL100. That's SAL100. Peace out, game. Best of luck and enjoy your day. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed that video. Above my head, if you're not already subscribed to this channel, I do ask you if you can please hit that subscribe button. It helps me out a good amount to reach more people. You can also follow me on Twitter. That's over there. Right in the corner is my @SalVetriDFS Twitter. And then above, you'll find my Patreon link. You can click on that if you want more exclusive content for me. Or a video is going to pop up, so why don't you check that one out as well. I think it's going to be beneficial for you. Thank you so much again for tuning in, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.